Earlier in the show, I just made the comment about how our dad would always say, you know, it's the smell of money when you smell manure. But I don't think about that at all. I think about how it's the smell of lost money. Think about what manure actually is when you smell it. What are you smelling? You're smelling ammonia, or at least partially ammonia. Well, what's in ammonia? Nitrogen. I don't want the ammonia going up in the air. I don't want the nitrogen going up in the air. I want that nitrogen going in the ground so it can help my next crop. So we're going to talk today a little bit about how you can do that on your farm and also how you prevent other nitrogen loss, manure loss, going down even deeper into the soil.
Well, there's a lot more nutrition in manure than just nitrogen. When we think about the phosphorus, the potassium, the micronutrients, the secondary nutrients, all those things in manure. And when we're looking at soils where we're getting manure applications every year, we're very concerned about where those nutrient loads are going in that soil profile. And when we talked last fall about some soil testing that we had done, looking at every inch going down in the top foot, we're seeing a lot of stratification of nutrients up in the top part of that profile, mainly in the top 2 or 3 inches of soil. We want to get that nutrition spread down a little bit deeper for a number of reasons that we'll talk about today.
Okay, most importantly, where we want to start with this manure thing is we want you to test your manure every single time. You have to know what you've got for nutrients in that manure before you can apply it. And not only the normal nutrients you'd think about, but also salt. We don't want too much salt put out there. I'll just give you an example even on our own farm. Here's what we found over the years. We're much further ahead if we cut our manure rate in half a lot of times and then supplement with some commercial fertilizer as opposed to running a full load of manure, and that's all we use for a fertility program, because then we end up getting too much salt on that. And then the other thing is there's so much good stuff in manure besides just the nutrients. Things like beneficial bacteria and fungi, we want to get those on more acres. Manure is a great thing. We just don't want you to overdo it.
Well, one of the things that can be overdone a little bit is putting that phosphorus out on top of the ground. And that's one of the things where I'm concerned with manure application. I'd like to see it injected deeper. When we talked about stratification a little bit earlier, that's one thing, just to get the nutrient load spread out. For manure management programs, I think that's very good to get some of that phosphorus down deep. But also, if we ever see any kind of erosion or runoff, or you get a big time rain after you put on that manure, we don't want phosphorus leaving our fields. By putting it deeper in our soil, that's where it's going to be safe and do the most good for your crops.
Okay, so Darren mentioned manure management plan. If you are a large livestock producer, undoubtedly you have to do a manure management plan with your county or your state. And the most important thing that they're looking at there is phosphorus load, because that's the #1 water quality issue we have in the United States today is excess phosphorus. You get too much phosphorus in the water, then you have more algae. That's a big problem. But since phosphorus is non-mobile in the soil, it's not going to leach down. It's not going to get down in tile lines. It's not going to get down in the groundwater. We're not concerned about that at all. What we're concerned about is if it's in the top inch of soil and that top inch runs down the hill, well, all of a sudden, your phosphorus moved right along with it. So that's the reason why we want you to inject this manure down a little bit deeper. If you inject all your manure down at 9 or 12 inches deep, then you've got no issues with the manure management plan, because they can come out and test your soil 0 to 6 inches and you didn't add any phosphorus to that ground. So it's an awesome deal, and it's something that we want you to definitely consider. The only drawback to that a lot of guys will say is, well, now you're getting all my nitrogen down deeper, so now I have more risk for leaching.
And there are a lot of things that get talked about like that, but it's simply not true. When you're putting nitrogen down deeper in the soil, there isn't as much oxygen down there, and we aren't going to see that nitrogen convert into a leachable form very quickly at all.
Well, that leachable form is nitrate, and that's what we do worry about. So we don't want you to over-exceed nitrogen in any form beyond what your soil can hold. So if your soil will only hold 150 pounds of nitrogen, don't be throwing a bunch of manure out there that's got 300 pounds of nitrogen. That's not doing anybody any good. You've got to be real careful on what you're applying out there for nutrients, and don't exceed what your soil will hold.
Well, the other thing you can do is use stabilizer type products, something like More Than Manure, right? With your manure as you're putting it out there, that way we can hold things like the phosphorus and we can protect it, and we can also hold the nitrogen in that correct form, that we don't see problems with leaching, and we have more time for our crop to pull in that nitrogen safely.
Okay, let's talk finally about where we started, which was the smell of manure. So the most important reason why we want you to inject manure on your ground, not spread it over the top, work it in a few days later, whatever. We want you to inject manure as much as you possibly can. It's because we want to protect that nitrogen, that ammonia that is in that manure, so it doesn't go up in the air. We want that to somehow find a way in the soil and attach itself, so inject that down deeper. You're going to have a lot less smell, so it's not going to bother the neighbors as much or the city people as much, but most importantly, you saved a bunch of money on your farm. Instead of now having to apply more nitrogen with commercial fertilizer, you save that nitrogen by injecting it down just a little bit deeper and keeping it in your field rather than having it go up in the air.
Well, there are a lot of things in the fall that we get excited about. Of course, harvest is going to be fun, but the other thing is we get to take that manure that's in a lagoon all summer and it's ready to get out in fields. We get to put that fertility back on our farms. I love manure as a fertility source for my crops. It works fantastic. What we're talking about today is just how to use it in the best possible way to get the maximum nutrient load out of that manure and into our crop, and then to do it safely for our environment as well.
Well, another important thing if you want to raise a great crop is controlling our weed of the week. We'll tell you how to stop it on your farm coming up later in the show.